Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidoo, sitting in this week for Riz Khan. Our guest today is the son of a senior American intelligence official who reluctantly became an undercover spy himself. Larry Kolb has lived and worked in a world that most of us only read about, in thrillers, a world of spies, fixers, thieves, conmen, and in some cases, beautiful women. The difference for him, though, is that his world was all too real. As recently as 2004, he foiled a planned smear campaign that could have had a profound effect on the US presidential election that year. It's all detailed in his latest book, America at Night, the true story of two rogue CIA operatives, Homeland Security failures, dirty money, and a plot to steal the 2004 US presidential election. It tells of a life of adventure, intrigue, and painstaking detective work, and talks are underway to turn it into a Hollywood movie. Larry, welcome to the show.
All right, thanks for having me
coming in. I read your book. I read it in one sitting. It was just like a thriller, and it would have been very satisfying if not for the fact that it was all true, which made it very disturbing and in some cases very frightening. One of the central plots in your book was this planned smear plot against the Kerry campaign before the 2004 election. Tell us about that.
In the summer of 2004, right after I had gotten out of the intelligence world and written a book about it, I went to Los Angeles to have a meeting with the movie producers that had bought the rights to my first book. And I had 3 spare hours there, my first day after finishing this first book, and agreed to go to lunch with an old friend of mine, a Washington attorney, who over lunch asked me a couple of questions that led me into an investigation that I ended up running for friends of mine and very high-level friends in the Department of Homeland Security. And in the process of investigating this counterterrorism case that they were very actively interested in, after solving that case for them, I kept digging. Something still didn't seem right. And the more I dug, eventually I discovered a plot by former CIA operatives who had also been Republican operatives when I'd known them 20 years earlier, to link John Kerry's campaign treasurer, Bob Farmer, to a company in Miami that was the target of a major counterterrorism investigation. I knew that there were about to be arrests made, there was about to be a lot of trouble for this company, and these old CIA operatives and Republican operatives had orchestrated a merger wherein Bob Farmer, John Kerry's campaign treasurer, was about to become chairman of the board of this company that, unbeknownst to him, was the target of this huge counterterrorism investigation. And they would have smeared Kerry, from the moment that was announced and arrests were made, etc.
So by extension, what would have happened there then is the press would have been full of stories about John Kerry's campaign treasurer being involved with a company that was being investigated for terrorism.
Well, it was being investigated not just for terrorism, but for alleged links with Al-Qaeda. So it would have been very, very bad for Kerry.
Reading the book, I was just wondering, there are 2 main characters that you cover in the book, Robert Sensi and Richard Hirschfeld. I was wondering, are there people like that who exist? Can 2 renegade CIA operatives, rogue operatives as you call them, actually have that kind of influence and can make such a difference?
Well, I think absolutely. The reason I was able to see this, to connect the dots and see this plot, when I was involved in an investigation that was on the periphery of it, was that I had been involved in covert political operations in various parts of the world before, so I could see the shape of this. And yes, there are absolutely very skilled people out there in the world that have been trained by American intelligence doing covert things politically, covertly around the world. And yeah, Bob Sensi and Richard Hirschfeld had a very big impact on things over the last 20 years, secretly.
Right at the outset of the book, you say that the CIA were looking for Richard Hirschfeld, one of these renegade operatives, and they had difficulty finding him. In fact, that's how you got involved, because you drew up the profile of him for them. I was wondering, we kind of get the impression that the CIA is this massive organization with a huge reach that can basically photograph stop signs in remote parts of the world and can tell you what you had for breakfast this morning, and yet you're saying in the book that they couldn't find a guy?
Well, at the time, Richard Hirschfeld, the man who genuinely, his real name was Richard Hirschfeld, he was masquerading as Richard Marshall. But he was operating very openly with a guy named Bob Sensi, who had been a CIA agent. He had also been the chairman of the Ambassadors Club division of Republicans Abroad, a major offshore part of the Republican National Committee. Bob Sensi had been in federal prison twice. He should have been known in the U.S. government system, and yet the friend of mine from Department of Homeland Security that got me involved in this case asked me to jump into it because they couldn't find anything in their databases, and I'm talking about the combined databases of the CIA, the FBI, the DEA, the IRS, et cetera, about Bob Sensi, who should have been in the system. Richard Hirschfeld had also been in federal prison, and he'd been very involved in a lot of things going back for 20 years, and there'd been a lot of scrutiny over him. He was thought to be a federal fugitive, and he was a known associate of Bob Sensi, and they didn't figure out that Richard Marshall, the guy that was calling himself Richard Marshall, that was operating openly with Bob Sensi, was actually Hirschfeld. I don't know why they couldn't figure that out, but they couldn't. They didn't, and I did.
Well, let's go to one of the callers. Mohammed is calling from Austria. Mohammed, go ahead with your call.
Yeah, my question is that why is the mainstream media like CNN or ABC so scared to talk about this issue? And I can understand that Fox won't deal with it because it has to do with the Bush administration. And why is like newspaper like New York Times or something are not talking about this issue? It's a big thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Well, I should say that the New York Times did do a full-page story about this when my book first came out. I think the story appeared in the New York Times in the last week of January, but it was in the form of a book review rather than a news story. And you're right, nobody has covered this as a news story to date, and I'm really not sure why.
Well, it is there are sensitive issues that are discussed in the book. We have an email here from a viewer in the United Kingdom, Paula, and she says, asks rather, has anyone tried to stop this book from being published?
Yes, and in fact, that may be part of the answer to why there hasn't been a lot of coverage about this story. Several months before the book came out, an attorney by the name of Jairus Leonard, who actually is part of the story told in the book, began making very aggressive attempts to block publication of the book. Jairus Leonard had been a Justice Department official in the Nixon administration. He had then been left the government officially to go to work as a private attorney, representing his first clients, the Republican National Committee and George Bush Sr. during Watergate. His job was to keep Bush and the Republican committee out of the Watergate scandal, to limit it to the White House. He did a very good job at that, and since then he had been actively involved in solving problems and cleaning up messes, covertly for Republicans. And when I met Bob Sensi, who's one of the characters that's one of the targets discussed in this book, the guy who had been a Republican official and a CIA agent who ended up going to jail. I met him through George Bush Sr. I met him in 1985 in the White House. I was introduced to, or given his business card by George Bush Sr., who said, this is a guy from the CIA whose cover is that he's a Republican official. He will take you off on a mission. I ended up going with Muhammad Ali to Beirut to try to get the American hostages released. The hostages are then being held in 1985.
There's some very interesting parts of the book. I mean, some of it actually, sounds fictitious, but you've written that this is not fictitious. This is fact. You've written that. I mean, one of the things was these two renegade CIA guys went to a Russian mafia leader at one time and said, "We can get things done for you." The guy was wanted in the United States. He was on all kinds of lists, and they said, "We can remove your name from all those lists. We can get you through the border. We'll get you into the United States. In fact, we'll even get you permanent residence. We'll get you a green card, and the cherry on the top, we'll get you a meeting with President Bush," and they were able to do it.
Well, that's what I have been told by a friend of mine who was or a couple of friends of mine who were very high-level officials in Homeland Security. They were astonished by the way that Bob Sensi and Richard Hirschfeld maneuvered this Russian oligarch into the United States when he was on watch lists, and took Bob Sensi took this man Boris Birstein to the White House, where he had a meeting with the president.
So they must have had quite a bit of influence.
They had some friends in high places, and this is at a time when Richard Hirschfeld was a fugitive from the U.S. justice system. There had been arrest warrants for him for about 10 years at the time, and the government, at least officially, believed that he was living in Cuba.
You mentioned Muhammad Ali earlier on. Now, he played something of a role with different administrations. He first went to Beirut, as you said, at the request of President Reagan.
It was President Reagan. We went to visit President Reagan in the White House, had a brief, friendly meeting with him, and just as we're leaving, the president rather slyly said, "You know, Mohammed, I think the vice president's here today. Maybe you should go see him. That would be a lovely surprise." And so we went off through the West Wing to the vice president's office, and once we got there, instead of all the fun that there had been a very fun atmosphere everywhere else we'd been, lots of kissing babies and hugging people, etc. But Vice President Bush shooed everybody but one aide out of his office and closed the door and said, "Now, the real reason we brought you here today is, Mohammed, we'd like you to use your credibility in the Muslim world to open a dialogue with the Ayatollah Khomeini, who we believe is behind the taking of the American hostages and other hostages that are being held in Beirut. And we'd like you to try to orchestrate the release of those hostages."
We have another question, email question here from one of our viewers. This is from Frank Chartrand here in California in the United States. He says, "For an agent of the CIA to not only admit but to confess, one should wonder how much is for entertainment purposes," he's talking about the book here, "and what degree or percent is fact? Knowing Jesse Jackson, Sharpton, Ali, fact. Much of the rest is or could be for entertainment purposes."
Well, I hope the book is entertaining, and people have told me that it is a very enjoyable read, but it's absolutely true. And the conclusions that I came to in writing the story, and the conclusions I came to about the plot itself, what I did was connect the dots out of the public record. This was another reason it was rather astonishing to me that nobody else had figured out what was going on. All of the key elements of the story were available in the public record. They weren't submerged documents that only I had access to. They were documents you could find in dusty courthouse archives, et cetera, et cetera. And I found those documents and put the pieces of the puzzle together. And for anybody that wants to go back and verify these facts themselves in the public databases, they can do that. But also on my website, larryjkolb.com, I've put a lot of the key documents there, so in various archival forms, so that people can see them themselves and come to the same conclusions. A third of my book, at the end of the book, is notes and bibliography, so that every key fact is verifiable and true.
In the book, you detail the lives of many people who may have, allegedly, have committed crimes. Do you fear for your life?
I did. When there was a time in 1984, after I had warned John Kerry of the plot against him, when I was not very comfortable about my prospects, and my cover, when I went and warned John Kerry about this, using the intelligence background that I had and the training that I had, I went and warned him covertly. I did it anonymously. He didn't know my real name. And within a few weeks of that, the Democrats had, just not intentionally, but through a slip-up, blown my cover, so that the White House knew my name. I assume Bob Sensi and Richard Hirschfeld, who were the bad guys in this story, knew my name. And at that point, I really feared for my life. And at that point, I decided instead of keeping this a big secret, which I had done originally, it was smarter for me to let as many people as possible know this story. And this book is part of, it was one of the things that I did then to protect myself.
It's kind of an insurance policy, isn't it? Yeah. I want to just end off on a lighter note. We have about a minute left, and you've been compared to Elvis Presley, haven't you?
Well, yeah, in looks, I mean in looks. Yeah, in 1984, I was photographed with Muhammad Ali and Jesse Jackson at a hospital in New York. And
we have the photograph right up there.
7 years later, a group of Elvis fans saw the picture and said, "Oh my God, that's Elvis!" And "Oh my God, this picture was taken when 7 years after Elvis's reported death. This is proof that that Elvis is still with us." So there was a TV show about this picture. It was a book based just on that picture. And then later I went on a show on Fox with Bill Bixby hosting it live from one of Elvis's favorite stages in Las Vegas to talk about who was really in the picture. It was me.
Larry, we could go on talking, but sadly we've run out of time. That's where we have to leave it.
Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for being with us. On the next show, we'll delve into the lives of the Lost Boys of Sudan. That's the name of an emergency program that resettled thousands of refugee boys from the Sudanese civil war in the United States. Most were orphaned or separated from their families, and now they are scattered throughout America. Don't forget, if you have any thoughts about pressing issues around the world, send your emails to riz@aljazeera.net. See you next time. Street Talk is next.